Kadosh, Boker Tov, Shavua Tov, Masechet Ketubot Daf Amud Aleph 4A1. Yesterday, if you remember, we just mentioned, right, in the last shiur, we just mentioned that if a person, we learned in the right, if a person has his bread already baked, and the food is already cooked, and the wine, right, is already mazug, which means they already prepared the sudah, and the father of the chatan or the mother of the kana, right? Why is it that we explicitly chose those two? Because it could have been anyone, right? But that's what we're saying. It's talking about, it doesn't matter which one's of which. So they passed away. So we put the deceased into a room. We put the chatan and the kala, right, into the chuppah, which means we get them married, right? Buel bilat mitzvah is going to have the first relations, which is called bilat mitzvah, right? This is the mitzvah, okay? And then what happens is right, Koresh, he separates, yeah? So here, the reason why it's called bilat mitzvah is because that's how they become clinging together. So that's mitzvah, right? To cling together, to become married. So he says they separate. They do the shivat imei mishteh, which means they do the sheva berachot. Then afterwards, he's going to do shivat imei avelut. Now, all those days of mishteh va'avelut, the chatan, hu yoshev ben anashim v'yishem anashim, right? We don't permit them to have yichud, right? Why? Because since an avel is prohibited in having relations, right? So therefore, they're not allowed to have yichud the entire time. However, though, even though, right, the kala, for example, is in avelut, we're not going to stop her from having her adornments, her takshitim, her jewelry for the 30 days, right? Why? Right? Because in such a case, the rabbis, exactly, they didn't want that all of a sudden she's going to imagine he gets married to a woman and all of a sudden after a thing, he's going to say, what did I get into? Yeah, exactly. What's going on over here? So therefore, right, they permit it. They don't take it away from them. Okay. Says the Gemara, Bedavka aviv shel chatan, or ima shel kala. Davka has to be the father of the chatan or the mother of the kala that they push off the kvura and everything. Because then if it's going to be that it loses, right, meaning they're going to lose the sudah, so therefore nobody's going to take care of it. But if it was the mother of the chatan or the father of the kala or any other family member, no, we don't do that. But rather, right, they bury him immediately and they push off the nisuin. They push off the marriage. Okay, now the whole question is how long do you have to push off the marriage for? So it's a whole thing over there. Is it only immediately after the Shiva or is it after the Shloshim? Okay, depends whether it was Mekayim Pidyav Rivya, Mekayim Pidyav Rivya. Okay, fine. Okay, this is the Gemara. Amar Rafram bar Papa. Yeah, it says Rafram bar Papa in the name of Chasta. Lo Shad. When we talk about that they're going to push off the Kvura in order to do the marriage, Ela Shenatan Maimar Gabea Basar. Only if they put water on top of the meat, which means that they're now preparing it. And therefore, if they already put water on the meat, which means that they're preparing the meat, now it's going to get ruined. What if they cook the meat? They're not going to, take it out of the freezer, let it defrost, cook, but if they didn't put the water on top of the meat, mizdaban, sell it. And then what? And then push off the nisuin until after the avelut. Which means here we're talking about the mamash, it's right before the wedding, that they can't wait. It's only they could wait. You understand? It could be that nowadays also, it depends on circumstances. It could be this halakha also changed because now it's nothing to do with just only the meat. It's everything in general. It's the hall, it's the orchestra, it's the deposit, it's everything. There's a lot of details. Okay? Amar Rava says, Uvikra, and when it's going to be in a very big city, even if you do put the water on top of the meat, which means you prepare the meat and everything, also you sell it. It's a huge city. You have tons of people that could buy the meat. You sell everything. So Amar Papa says, Uvikva, and in a small village, even though they didn't put the water on top of the meat, it's not going to be sold. Why? Because it's such a small village. You don't have the amount of people to start buying from you. So even if you don't put the water on the meat, you have to do the wedding immediately. Because if not, what are you going to do with it? You can't sell it. It's going to be a huge loss. So therefore, you do it right away. So when's the case of a chasta? One more time. What did we just say? We just said that if it's a big city, even if you did put the water on the meat, you could still sell it. If it's a village, which is a small city, so then what? So even if you didn't put the water on the meat, you don't sell it. So what's the case of Chastad? He said to do with whether you put the water or didn't put the water. So he says, Ravashi, you go Mata Mechasia, right? It's like a city of Babel called Mata Mechasia. The Mapka Mikrach or Mapka Mikfar, that it's in between. It's not a big city, but it's not a village. So therefore, in such a case, right, that's the deen of Rav Chastad that we said that there's a difference between whether you put the water or you didn't put the water on the meat. So we learned the right and according to Rav Chastad. Imagine right now the person has a bread baked. His meat was already slaughtered. The mazug and his wine is already mazug. Mazug, remember these stuff have to pour water, right? Water inside of their wine in order to dilute it, in order to make it drinkable. Because if not, you weren't able to drink the wine. It was too powerful. It's too strong. And at that time, nowadays we already buy it, so it's okay. Okay, but once upon a time they had to do. So the father of the Chatan passed away, the mother of the Kala, מכניסים את הבן לחדר ואת החתן והכלה לחופה, ובל בלעמיצה ופורש, ונוהג שיבת מן המשתה, ואחר כך שיבת מן הגלות, ויכול אותן הימים הוא ישב מן אנשים, והיא ישנה מן אנשים. Right? נקודה. Now this was exactly right as before, that's why they didn't translate it, which is basically the same thing, that all of a sudden one of the family member dies, again we're talking about the father of the Chatan and the mother of the Kala, so then we're going to bring them into the room, right? They get married, right? They do Bilam Mitzvah, he separates, does the Shivat Inyan Mishteh, which is the Shem Brachot, and then he does the Shivat Inyan Velut. Now says Halacha, V'chein, Misha Pirsa Ishto Nida, the same Halacha applies that if a woman becomes a Nida, right, before the Bilam Mitzvah, Hu Yeshem Ben Anashim, Yeshem Ben Anashim also. We're not going to be somech on the Chatan the Kala that they're not they're going to stop themselves from relations, which means, right, the fact that they never had relations before, it's going to be too strong for them. Because remember, right, until now, they were not married. They get married. But now what's stopping them? She became a Nida, the night of the wedding, right? They come home, she becomes a Nida. Oh, now what? You're going to rely on them? They're not going to have relations for the next 12 days, whatever amount of days, right? It's going to be powerful. You understand why? Because they were never together, and all of a sudden not. So therefore, that's why since she became Nida immediately, they have to separate. They're not allowed to have yichud. Why? Because if not, we suspect that maybe they're going to have relations together because they never had it. He's not able to control himself. Somebody that's, for example, a married person, right? Since he already has pakasalo, which means he already tasted it. So therefore, for him, he could control himself. Okay, because been there, done that. It's right. What? So that's what the. Right, we're not going to stop the tachshitim, the dormants from the kala for 30 days. And even so, right? Lo yivol, they should not have relations. Not on the Friday night, because then what happens is that he's going to break the betulim, the virginity, the hymen on Friday night, which is a menachas surah Shabbat. He's making chabura. Also, she starts bleeding, right? And not on Motzei Shabbat, and we'll explain why. So Amar more. So let's try to analyze this right. More sense. So each one they sleep by themselves. The Chatan sleeps with the men, and the Kala sleeps with the women. Says Rabbi Yochanan. So this is the proof to Rabbi Yochanan. The Amar Rabbi Yochanan says Rabbi Yochanan. Because even though they said En Avelu b'Moed, there's also no Avelut. It's just like Shabbat. No Avelut on Shabbat. No Avelu b'Moed. But anything which is private, for example, relations, is something done privately. Right? Or for example, shower, things like that. It is noheg also, right, on the regel. So therefore you see from here, right, that even though this is something private is noheg. So to here, it's going to be noheg. So if Yosef, the son of Rava, was Doresh in the name of Rava, that's only if he didn't have relations once. Aval Baal, but if he did have the relations, here it says, because Shelo Baal, Yitzro Chazak alav, ויש לחשוש שלא יוכל להתאפק מליבו. Yeah, he's got such a strong yitzhak, he won't be able to stand it. But once he did have relations, אשתו ישנה עמו. Now they're allowed to have yichud, just like any other question, not any other, right? Any other. Ask the Gemara, 1 second. What was our case? Our case is that the father of the Chatan or the mother of the Kala, they passed away. They're already ready for the wedding. So we put them into the chuppah, and then what happened? And then we let them do bilat mitzvah. he separates, he does Sheva Brachot, and then after Sheva Brachot for 7 days, then he does the 7 days of Avelut. And what do we say? That entire time of the 14-day period, what happens? He has to sleep between the man, and she sleeps with the women, right? It doesn't mean, it just means that each one, they're not allowed to have yichud. So for example, they can invite somebody over. So they can invite a couple to their house, and they could, the man will sleep in the same room as the man, and the woman will sleep in the same room as the woman. It's also, it just means that they're not sleeping together, even if it's going to be in the same house, right? In separate beds. No. It has to be, somebody has to be there. That's what I'm saying. It has to be somebody, it could be a family member, but it has to be people which understand, which are like a shomim. They're like a, yes, like a bodyguard. Yeah, making sure that there's nothing gonna, no foul play. So the Gemara asks, here we're talking about the Chatan already did Bila Mitzvah. So if he did Bila Mitzvah, Uktani, and we still learned that what? Why then? Answers the Gemara, you're right. When did we say these words? That he has to sleep between the men and she sleeps in between the women? Only she became an Ida before the relations. So since she became an Ida before the relations, that's why, right, there was no Bia. If there's no relations, we're going to suspect he can't control himself, and therefore they're not allowed to have yichud. So says the Gemara, what are you talking about? In that Braita, it says, right, it says over there, right, there was first the Bila Mitzvah, 7 days of the Sheva Brachot, 7 days of the Lut, and then he sleeps between the men, she sleeps between the women, and then the Gemara says, Vechen. And also, if a woman becomes an Ida, which means when you say and also, it means it's both cases. It's not only in the case of Pisan Ishton Ida, it's both cases. So answers the Gemara, Daftala the Bet 4b, right? This is what we say. Also, if she became an Ida, they didn't have relations yet. That's what it means. Meaning why? Right? Right? So now the Gemara is going to ask, I don't understand. He says, are you going to tell me now that the Isur of Avelut is lighter in the eyes of people than the Isur of Nida? Why? Because you say that if he already had relations, so we're going to be somech that he's not going to be with his wife when she's a Nida. But we're not going to be somech that he's going to be with his wife when he's an Avel. Are you going to tell me that people in Avelut is lighter? Avelut means mourning. Are you going to tell me that a person that's in mourning is lighter than a woman becoming an Nida? Right? So says the Gemara, says do you know that anything that a woman does for her husband, right? There's going to be a whole bunch of halachot in the Mishnah later on in Tetubet, where a woman has to do for her husband, which means it's not written in the Ketubah, but remember, the Ketubah is from him, his obligations to her. But there's a Mishnah, there's halakha. What are the obligations? Her towards him, which means a woman has to cook for her wife, right? She has to clean for the husband, right? Sorry. What? So the halakha now says it is. So you're going to tell me that Avelut is lighter than that? Any melacha that a woman does for her husband, and Nida could do it for the husband, except for mezigat kosh, she can't pour him the wine. Hatzat amita, doing the bed in front of him, or chatzap, she can't wash his hands, face, and feet. So you understand? That means that once upon a time, in the good old days, Richard, a woman would come and she would actually wash his hands, wash his feet, wash his face, right? Nowadays, right, it doesn't get sense. So when she's an Nida, she's not allowed to do that. So he says, we learned. Even though we said a man cannot force his woman when she's in Avela, when she's in mourning, he cannot force her to come and start putting on makeup. But we said, she's allowed to do all these things, which means that you see from here that Avelut is lighter, right, than what? That means we're not going to suspect that they're going to come to relations. So you see, to do the Isur of Avelut, we're not going to suspect that he's going to come and have relations with her, but to do with Nida, yes. So you see from here that the Isur of Avelut is stronger than Nida, that by a Nida we suspect it, and by Avelut we're not going to suspect it. So why by us is the exact opposite, right? So answers the Gemara, there's no, you know what? There's no question why. Kamba Velut Didei, the Kamba Velut Dida. When we're talking about the Avelut of the husband, so when the Chatan is an Avel, we do suspect that he's going to have relations with his kala, even though he already had a relationship with her beforehand. We do suspect it. However, why? Because the man, he has a Yetzirah, and it's much stronger. But to do with the halachot of her avilut, right? There, right? Just like it's mashma at the beginning of the Braita, the husband cannot force the woman to come and start putting on makeup and all these things. So therefore, in such a case, it's going to be permitted that a woman would do these things, because even if, right, he's going to have a strong Yetzirah, since she's in the avilut, she's not going to let it. Which means like this: if he's an avilut, but this is very important for a man, right? The relations, it speaks to him. So therefore, for him, he'll get over it. He just wants to do something. But for a woman, it's not on the top of her mind, right? So therefore, for her, even if he wants it, she won't let him. Why? She's an avilut. She'll put him in his place right away. What? She just lost her family member. Now he wants to, she'll give it to him strong. So therefore, that's the difference between his avilut and her avilut. So says the Gemara, it says both cases together. You put the father of the chatan or the mother of the kala, and we put them in the same stance, in the same statement. And we said by both of them that he has to sleep between the men, she has to sleep with the women. So what are you talking about? Well, now you're only talking about her avilut and not his. It says the same name. So says the Gemara, when do we say the mother of the kala, asharan, all the other halachot we said that we put the deceased in the room and then we put them in the chuppah, but to do with that, they're not allowed to have yichud. That is only going to be when it's the father of the chatan, but they're not allowed to have the yichud. But if it's going to be the mother of the kala, then yes. So says the Gemara, is there a difference even between the avilut of the husband and the wife? We learned to the Braita. If somebody's father-in-law or mother-in-law passes away, he cannot force his wife to come and to put on makeup. Yeah, he can't force his wife to do that. So he comes and he says, he has to do avilut with her. And the same thing the opposite way. If her mother-in-law and her father-in-law, meaning the husband's parents, pass away, and so you see from here that it's exact same halachot, which means mitzad halacha, he's not allowed to. Imagine right now somebody's father-in-law passed away, mother-in-law passed away. It doesn't matter whether it's the husband or the wife. And also the other ones that have music, you have to be doing avilut also. It doesn't work. So the Gemara, Tani b'avilut today, right? We did learn in avilut only in his avilut. So says the Gemara, we talk about it says v'chen. V'chen means right, and also which means that it applies in both cases. And so the Gemara, when do we say on the v'chen, akichul b'pikus, which is basically on the makeup, that has to be. So ask the Gemara, behind moktani, but it's with him. My love, we're not talking about that they're permitted to sleep together. And it's going to no. They're allowed to be in the same house together, but not sleeping together. Just like Rabbi said to his son, in front of her, you have to be nuheg avilut. But it's not going to be in front of her. Yeah, then what? You don't have to do avilut. Meaning that here, only if it's in front of the other spouse, they have to be nuheg avilut as well. This is not kavod, it's not derech eretz. The father-in-law, mother-in-law, doesn't matter which side, passed away, and then he or she is, fooling around, and they're doing whatever they want, they don't care. In front of the other spouse, they have to be nuheg, the respect, they have to be nuheg avilut. Rashi comes, and he wants to bring another answer on the first original question. Can you compare regular avilut to this case? Right? The aviluta de alma. He says, aviluta de alma, you're right. In a regular case of avilut, it's much stricter. Because when a person loses a family member, it's very, very powerful. Right? We're not talking about they lost a father and mother. It's powerful. He says, the person not to disgrace it. But avilut of here, since the rabbis were already mekel, which means like this. What was the leniency? The leniency was that the person already died. They were deceased. What do? You put them in a room and you pretend that they didn't die. Now you get them married. And you tell them they have relations. And then you tell them, okay, separate yourself. And then you tell them you have to do Shema Berachot first. The fact that they were already mekel in such a fashion that first of all they got married. Then all of a sudden they have Bila Mitzvah. Then they're allowed to do Shema Berachot. Then only afterwards you do 7 days of Avilut. So because of that, because of that, it's like they were already lenient, so then people are going to come, they're going to be mizalzel, but say, okay, fine, it's not a real avelut. Why? Look, it was pushed off, it was postponed. There's a wedding, this and that, and then afterwards the Sheva Berachot. By the time the avelut kicks in, so because of that, what do the rabbis say? No, it doesn't count. You understand? What does that mean? That even this avelut, it's lighter, so people are going to, so they get to be stricter. So you cannot compare our avelut to regular case of avelut. Regular case of avelut, you're right. It's so powerful, nobody would even think about doing these things. But right, that's what usually happens. Usually when a person, mamash, unless they had no connection whatsoever to their parents, right? But a person loses a family member, but they're not thinking right now about doing all these things. You understand? The question they could even think about even showering or having meat, or for them, their mind is not there. You understand? It's completely off. So my kula, what was the leniency? If you're going to tell me the leniency was diktani goel bila mitzvah koresh, that they have relations, hata mishum belo chalav el there's no velut yet. Ila Rabbi Eliezer until he leaves the house. Or according to Rabbi Yeshua, which means when does the velut start? So according to the Shita Rabbi Eliezer, a velut starts when the deceased goes out of the entrance of the house. According to Rabbi Yeshua, and this is the way that we pass in, when they cover over the cover of the burial, meaning that they buried it inside, and then they start pouring all the sand right on top, right? So that's when they start the avelut, right? So he says over here, the kula is the fact that you just tell them that they're doing 7 days of mishteh and then 7 days of avelut. That's the leniency. So because of that leniency, that's what we said, people are going to make this mistake. Okay? Next, Amar Mor, Benkach, the next topic is going to be very interesting. Whether it is that, what happened, right? They're not supposed to have relations, not on Erev Shabbat, and not Motzei Shabbat. Meaning not on Friday night and not Motzei Shabbat. This Shabbat, I understand on Friday night, Mishum Chabura, you're breaking the hype, you're breaking the virginity, which means blood is coming out. You know it's called blood, right? On Shabbat, right? Ela b'Motzei Shabbat, my Lord, but why not on Motzei Shabbat? So the Gemara, Rabbi Zera says Rabbi Zera, Mishum Cheshbono, of Hamud Aleph on the top, because of Cheshbono. What does that mean? You're not allowed to have relations for Motzei Shabbat, because then what's going to happen is you're going to start making calculations on Shabbat, right? Which means if a person is going to get married on Motzei Shabbat, they're going to do Sudan Nisrin on that night, and we're going to start suspecting that all of a sudden he's going to come to the caterer and he's going to say, how much did you say was that? Maybe we should go that. Or now you want to add me, we just realized that there wasn't a good Sudan sheet, we're going to be hungry, can you add me a fish? And then we're going to start doing Cheshbonot on Shabbat, so because of that, you're not allowed to get married on Motzei Shabbat. Nowadays, there's other reasons as well why you're not allowed to get married on Motzei Shabbat, whether it's because of Chilul Shabbat, that people would come and they would right away get Chilul Shabbat, and other reasons as well. But that's just, we'll try to keep it going.